Welcome to the Develop Yourself podcast, where we teach you everything you need to land your first job as a software developer by developing yourself, developing your skills, your habits, your network, and more. I'm one of your hosts, Aaron Hayslip, and today we're going to be talking with Brian Schuster about how beginners can get involved in developing the world of Web3, also known as crypto. Brian, who, by the way, is our first repeat guest on the podcast, has extensive expertise and experience in cloud engineering as well as all things crypto. But at his core, he's a passionate mentor and happens to be a co-founder of mine on a side project we're working on to help developers transition to the world of Web3. So I hope you enjoy our conversation as we define what Web3 is, what crypto is, and how you can get involved, even as a beginner. Oh, and by the way, Brian drops some bad words, some F-bombs, maybe A-bombs, S-bombs, that kind of thing. So if you're not into that, I just didn't take the time to go find them. Otherwise, I would have deleted them. And next time, I'll tell Brian to not use that language on this podcast. It's a family podcast, y'all. All right, let's go. All right, cool. Thanks, Brian, I think you are the first, by the way. I always say this on podcasts, but you're the first repeat guest on the podcast.
Hey.
So I appreciate you being here.
Of course.
I do need to give, I think, some context. I haven't told the full story of what you and I are doing. I think I mentioned it in the last podcast with Peter that I'm working on like this other Web3 project.
Yeah.
I think it's safe to I don't know why. I feel like folks are secretive about it, but we're working on building a project together that would help experienced software engineers transition into Web3. So that being said, you and I kind of talk all the time anyway.
Right.
I asked you to be on today specifically to talk about a journey you went through recently of getting involved in a pretty, I'd say pretty big Web3 project that's opened up a lot of other doors. And I think what's interesting for our audience, which are, assuming they're rather beginner developers thinking about getting into software engineering. Some of them are junior developers. I want to explain that there's this whole other world in Web3 where the point of it is democratization. Like anyone can get involved. You can learn very quickly and you can find yourself contributing substantially to large projects and then even getting paid in a variety of ways for contributing to those large projects as well.
Oh, yeah.
But I love to back up and first ask you to define what is Web3, for a brand new beginner who has just been hearing about Ethereum and Bitcoin and all those things in a concise way. What would you say Web3 is?
Unfortunately, I don't have concise down quite
That's
yet.
Fine.
It's a new, it's a new term. I think it's a rebranding from some of the older terms we've used. Like when I started here in 2016, it was blockchain technology, decentralized ledger technology, cryptocurrency, and things like that. None of those things really captured the energy versus Web3 ended up being the right thing, right? Which was like, okay, it's an iteration over Web2. You moved into this new space there. So I guess I don't have the exact answer because we're still defining the edges.
Yeah.
Like one of
and
the
then
edges.
Web2.
Yeah.
I was going to say Web2 being, because I think, honestly, I wasn't really familiar with the term Web2 until Web3 came, right?
Interesting.
Just like I would assume folks during World War II didn't think about World War I being called World War I yet.
Right. It was the Great War back then. Yeah.
Yeah, but Web 2 is kind of, what was the movie that was real big that covered Facebook,
The social network.
Yeah, that was Web 2. Like that phenomenon.
Right. And I mean, it's just to kind of put it in, Web 1 was basically everyone getting online for the internet. And it was really like, I like the analogy that they have there where Web 1 was a website that's up there and you're communicating with the world. Web 2 was really communicating with one another. So you can really think about that social aspect is what really defined Web 2. And just also generally talking about a maturity, right? I mean, e-commerce was Web 1, but the e-commerce we have today is miles and miles ahead of Web 1. So you can't think of these as a box there. It's just evolving. Web 3 is really at its core, it's about decentralization. That's what it is. Everything in Web 1 and Web 2 was very decentralized. You do everything on centralized servers. Now we're taking a lot of those services and decentralizing them and putting them out to the world. That's really what it is. That's the simple phrase, but in the same way that's saying, for somebody who doesn't know anything about the internet, like imagine in 1999, you're trying to think, in Web 2, it's going to be all interconnected, we're communicating, whatever. It's like, well, We already have email. I already kind of have some chat applications. What's Web 2 differently? When you live in it, it's a much different beast. So like how user authentication is handled is very different. Who owns the data is very different. How you deal with money is a whole different factor. What do you own? What can you own there? It's all very different. So really, if you have to take one thing, it's decentralization. That's what I would say.
So, let me throw out an example here, and you can correct me if I'm wrong in any of this. So let's think about Facebook, because all the controversy around Facebook because they own all of your data, right? Which means like literally, I mean, digitally, but physically, your data lives on a server that Facebook pays for. So companies pay Facebook ads, they get tons of money. So then they pay for these servers and they own this data. So it's theirs to do what they want with. So when we say decentralization, what we're talking about is if you thought of, a social network, for example, that was somehow built using Web3 technology, then that data wouldn't be owned by a single company. It would sort of be owned by a multitude of stakeholders, which is probably going to get us into, the question there is then, and this is where my brain goes to, okay, so if a centralized company doesn't own the data, then who pays to maintain the data, to keep the architecture alive, to keep the servers alive?
Right.
And that's where we get into blockchain, right? I mean, that's the technology that enables all of this. So how in that vein, then how would you explain, I guess in layman's terms, what the blockchain is, and then how it enables decentralization?
So let's take a step back and talk about what Web 2 really does and what centralization really means. So you're right that they're saying that, they own a centralized server, and they do that, and they own your data. But the truth is, in decentralization, it's not like you own your data from the sense of it's yours to keep. I mean, we're working on the technology to make it secret. That's everything behind zero knowledge proofs, which is a topic that is very, very complex, not worth getting into. We're trying to make it so that only I know what's happening. But today it's 100% transparent and out there for the world.
Yeah.
But what really matters is more of who has the ability to change the data and control the flow of data.
Yeah.
I, as a user, banking institutions are really easy. I want to send money to Aaron, so I can change the data. You can change the data. My bank can change the data. And so if somebody decides to come and talk to my bank and say, hey, freeze those funds or take it away, or somebody can illicitly get access to those funds and say, I'm going to steal them, and the bank accidentally gives it to the wrong person, they do that. So there's this third party that really has the ability to transact. I have the right to transact, you have the right to transact, and somebody else who isn't really between you and me has the right to transact. Web3 is different because I have the right to transact with my data, you have the right to transact with it, only I have the right to transact. I get to send it to you, you have the right to transact after it's sent to you, you own those assets, and no one else. No one else on earth. There's no third-party intermediary. So that's the thing. The world can still read it, right? It still reads. So in the same sense that Facebook, if Facebook wanted to go and decide to create an analytics company on the blockchain to read it, they can go and read that data, but they do not have the right to control that data. If I wanted to send, and this has actually caused a lot of issues because like in the NFT space, people are now stealing people's art and throwing it online and doing stuff with it. Guess what? You can't stop that. DMCA takedowns or whatever it's called doesn't work in that space because it's all on the blockchain. So there's new problems to be resolved, but that's really that right to transact that we're talking about. On that side.
So that's a helpful clarification. So, and that I think really does get into blockchain because we're talking about changes in the data, right?
Right.
And that is, if you don't have a programming background, this idea of immutable data is fairly foreign. So I want to get into your story here, but just one more minute. Explain a little bit like about the blockchain and how it enables I guess to put it in the way that your example, how it allows us to remove the bank from a financial transaction, for example.
Right. So this is where we get into centralization and how this technology works. So like, let's go back to the old days, right, where we didn't have computers at all, but we had like a safe, a vault, or something that exists out there. I have gold. I don't want to keep it at my house because I don't have the ability to keep it. And all of a sudden this thing comes around, a financial institution, a bank, something local. I have a safe and I have guns and all these things here. If I give your money to you, I'm going to keep it secure. But during that whole transaction, as soon as you have control of that gold bar, as soon as you have that, I mean, technically it belongs to me, but like there's nothing stopping you from being able to go off and do that, at least inherently, right? I mean, that's the thing. Like banks still have this problem today, but we solve the security problem by putting significant regulation around it, significant illegal around it, significant crime enforcement, and all these things. So we have this huge ecosystem that's around to solve this one problem. So blockchain came around and it used a couple of technologies basically to go and solve this problem. At its core is really private public key cryptography, and for DevMint, we cover this whole session of hashing and cryptography and private public key. But effectively, what a private public key cryptography allows you to do is to say, I'm going to generate some secret on my side. It's going to be some random number that's held only by me. And the math is such that only I am able to prove that I own this. Like literally no one else. I'm going to generate a signature that is so unique that I can prove that. And mathematically, we can prove this. This is known science to do that. So basically what I've done, one, is I'm able to prove I uniquely own something. The ledger is then immutable. The reason that matters is because it starts off basically from a clean slate. It's a state machine, but it's a state machine that basically assumes an address is null. So like that's a unique property of the blockchain that if you have, there is no such thing as a null address, I guess. It's just an address that has no balance associated with it or no activity against it. So literally every number in the existence of history, whatever that 2 to the 256-bit addresses that are on the blockchain basically have zero address. But it starts from a baseline there, and you can't change history. So if I go and say, okay, I'm going to mint 1 million tokens, and I'm going to send half of that to Aaron, it exists there forever. You can't go back and change this.
So just for beginners, so when we say ledger, we're talking about basically a record of the transactions.
It is a record of the transactions. Imagine a sheet of paper that I can't erase, I can't destroy, I can't do anything. Yep. And I write up $1 sent to Aaron. So now if you research Aaron's address, Brian address, $1. Imagine it's a sheet of paper that can't be torn down, it can't be teared, it can't do that. And so we can always see that from the beginning of time. So now it says, okay, well, I now just minted 1 million tokens, right? And you'll actually see that. I mint 1 million new tokens and I give it some other name and I send half of that to Aaron and then a quarter of that to somebody else. Well, it's a record that exists there and it exists there forever. That's effectively what's going on with the blockchain. You're adding additional blocks and, doing that. And you can only change the state. You can't really revert the state. That's not how it works there. So that gets into some, so how we get that is something called consensus, basically. And it's actually something we don't cover in our course, actually. And that's, that's one of the controversial things I think I'll do with this course, because you don't need to be a good developer, and understand consensus deeply. It's good to know for some cases, but basically there's a way that these guys are able to agree on what's in that ledger, but that's beyond kind of what we cover. However, there is one important thing here, because there's actually two types of security, and this is really important. So let's go back to the gold example. I go and give gold to, this, or let's say actually, for example, we have banknotes, right? That basically I go and do. So I hand a bunch of banknotes to the bank there. There's really two ways that I can kind of fuck this up for, everyone involved. I can go to the bank and rob them and steal that money, so it now belongs to me. But let's say I can't do that. So instead I decide I'm going to make everyone's life miserable and I'm going to destroy it. I'm going to plant a fire. I'm going to burn the son of a bitch to the ground just because I want to see it burn to the ground, to do that and make that happen. Guess what? In both cases, Brian lost his money. And somebody else has the ability to go through and make that happen. And so in the case of my ledger that's sitting on the wall that can't be destroyed, if someone is able to destroy it, I basically just remove the value from that system. That's why decentralization matters. What it's saying is that basically you have some consensus protocols that anyone in the world can go and spin up a server. They can go and validate transactions. They can go and mine or, stake tokens or whatever. Again, probably beyond what we're going to talk about today. But I have hundreds of these so that no one can go down and burn down the bank. Yep. You can remove one server. You're not going to be able to remove thousands. You're not going to be able to do that. That's how you achieve that. So cryptography, immutability, and decentralization kind of make this magic sauce that says, yeah, I can really now take my money, prove it belongs to me, put it on a ledger that can never be changed, and then make it so that no one can ever, cannot steal it from me and cannot destroy it. That's the magic sauce there.
Awesome. I think it's a great, concise explanation of some pretty big topics here. right. The last thing I'm going to do before I want to move into your story is,
Please.
so we've talked about essentially the financial aspects of what, crypto brings into, I don't know, enables. But why is that like a concern for software engineers? I mean, why has this enabled an entire new ecosystem of the way we build anything on the internet? I mean, how does this stretch beyond? Because I think when I think of the term Web3, I think it encompasses things beyond just, banking and currency.
Right. And I guess part of what it is that it's, part of it right now is kind of visioning the future, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
again, with any group here in any sort of technology, you're always going to have the visionaries early on that kind of get it way early, or believe in the technology. I tend to be more visionary in the way that, and not like in the wholly visionary, but more just that I can believe in the future and I can kind of see these things going down there. So I tend to be early on. But I guess the reason why you if you want to be concerned about it, you should. Because again, I believe that no one has to participate in this stuff until it's kind of ready. I mean, that's what the main market and even the late market is about in there. It's guys that don't deal with this technology until it's more stable, there's more products involved, they've thought of more of the use cases, they've worked out the kinks and do that, in which case by that point, you're not going to get a 10x return. It's going to be more like a 10% return, but you can do it. So you can wait if you want to. But I guess it's in the same way that, well, how did the internet really affect the world? How did those things there? The reason you might want to care about these things, especially in money, is that all of a sudden we've democratized something that has never been democratized before. We've never had the possibility. You can make money. That's a big deal. That's a really, really big deal. Yeah. People spent decades before this, in the 90s and 2000s, trying to mint alternative currencies. And guess what? That is a existential threat to the nation state model. Every single nation state on earth mints its own money. And it's a good business and it's a good model to be that. You can tax your citizens, you can control currency, you can have things like inflation. And so I think it was Digigold, I think was the name of it back in the 2000s, that tried to do the same thing. It was a bank that existed elsewhere. They minted their own currency. They had some of the elements that blockchain has today. They wiped out by the feds, basically. They got wiped out. Now you can mint your own money. And all of a sudden now people are starting to experiment and say there's all these additional things they can do, like being able to create your own liquidity pooling so that you can then go to a decentralized exchange and allow people to trade your currency with other decentralized currencies, or even like stable coins like USD. And all of a sudden you can make a fee off of that, which means that now all of a sudden the thing that only banks were able to do before, you can do for your little startup. And so if you have a small pool of, say, a currency that has a value of 100 million, you own 10% of that stake, and you're yield farming that 10%, you're all of a sudden and you're getting a 10% fee, you're making $1 million a year off of that. You have this engine that all of a sudden sits behind it, does this. So I think we're still exploring the full use cases. But I think the DeFi at its core says, I can control my own money, I can mint them, and now all of a sudden I have this whole new toy chest to play with, to figure out. I think for anyone that's forward looking and looking for new ways to solve old problems or new models to do that, Web3 is in a very exciting space. It's not going away. It's going to stay here. And that's why you should be interested.
Yeah. Okay. Love that. Great introduction. That's sort of I think a fair primer for understanding Web3 overall. All right. I want to get into your story a little bit, Brian, because, when I met you, you had been fairly involved in Web3, at least from, and this, again, you correct me if I'm wrong, but from my perspective, it was you had done the reading, you had educated yourself, you'd learned a ton about it. But at that point, you hadn't developed like a smart contract, right? You hadn't like diving in necessarily and written anything,
right?
Like as a developer. Then what I saw is over the course of, I don't know how many weeks this was. In my head, it was like 4 weeks, maybe less. You got involved with a project, learned how to build smart contracts, started writing your own stuff for this online community. And then before you knew it, people were coming to you to help them fix massive NFT projects.
Right. Like and fix projects, go do that. So yeah,
The reason why I want to bring this up is because I think that story is one that will be replicated hundreds, thousands of times over. Where that is the heartbeat of this movement is anyone can get involved and contribute, because the nature of the work is such that it enables that.
right. So yeah, let me go back and start as early as I can. That makes sense. So anyway, by trade, I'm a cloud engineer. I'm a site reliability engineer. My last role that I'm about to leave in the next week or so is a manager for an SRE team. So I got got operational background. And then I just studied a lot of other technologies. I've been a Python developer since 2012, and actually a very particular type of developer. So I had some help here that I didn't realize was even a help. I was never a full stack developer. I never really developed front end applications, but I built scripts basically. The longest script I've ever written was like probably 1,000 lines, which is tiny compared to most applications. Most of them are between 200 and 300 lines at most, right? And you're importing libraries and doing stuff like that. But it was so close to the metal, basically, where I'm not really using frameworks or anything else, that I'm just using the base language, that's the way I thought. That's the way I kind of dealt with these. And it was never too complex. So I kind of held all these ideas in my head as I was building. That ended up being very helpful and why I was able to move as fast as I did and as quickly as I did.
Sure.
So that's one of the factors.
Yeah.
So I started in 2015, and a friend of mine sent me the Ethereum white paper and said, "Hey, read this." That was pre-launch, by the way. And so I read it, didn't really think a lot about it. Wasn't until 2016 that I basically decided I wanted to, start investing, and just investing, period, in stocks or whatever. But stocks were kind of boring to me. I didn't have a lot more money to play with. And all of a sudden this cryptocurrency thing's there. It's like, hey, it's techie. It's, fun.
Yeah.
It's a space. It's no one gives a damn. Because again, in 2016, no one gave a shit.
Yeah. And by the way, the Ethereum white paper was just a academic paper that explained what Ethereum could be.
Right. It was pre-launch. They had some ideas. Yeah. This came out of a group of 8 Canadians meeting in, I think it was either Montreal or some Canadian city. They just happened to like what Bitcoin was doing. They said, well, can't we develop smart contracts? Can't we take Nick Szabo's idea and push that into, this thing? So pre-launch. So anywho, Ethereum was out and I started investing. It was like, 10, 15 bucks a week, small stuff, right? To go and play around. And so finally I started looking at this and I was just seeing some crazy, crazy price movements, like 3,000% increases, lots of movement. And it was just doing that. And it was like, okay, what the hell is actually going on? So I had a year of what I call quiet study and what I did there. Now, the reason I got it, so I started with Python. That was the first thing. The second thing that really helped is that I understood decentralization. I got it. I understood what was different about it. That was critical. I read a book called The Spider and the Starfish years ago, which really focused on the difference between centralized system and decentralized systems. I started researching organizations that operate in a more decentralized manner. Things like, like the New Zappos organization, Valve back in the day, a lot of other organizations that had this decentralized model and how they did that. So that was really tightly ingrained. I think that had more to do with my speed on getting up to date more than anything else, because I didn't have to be convinced of decentralization. I knew what it was. So we had that element. So that was also in my back pocket. I started studying the technology and just really went through it. So I read Mastering Bitcoin. I read The Internet of Money. I was reading white papers. I was doing stuff really not being that useful, in the space. I was just reading. I was just consuming. Wasn't until in 2017 that I started writing up about this. And I had already been writing on Quora for education, oddly enough, and data science, because I was also in analytics. And then eventually I switched over to Bitcoin and blockchain and started explaining this. And I started getting a ton of traction. And this was right as cryptocurrency started making it into the mainstream, and started making it there, where Coinbase was getting a lot of traction. A lot of exchanges were finally getting out there. People started asking what the hell Bitcoin was and all these other things. Ethereum was still underground at that point. And so I just tried to explain it. And so I literally had a system where I was writing 3-4 articles a day. I was adding some other things. And then, on Quora, and these were, not huge posts, but, enough. And over the course of the year, I wrote something like 1,500 articles.
Crazy.
And
which, by the way, I've learned this about you, that you are a unique character in the sense of, whenever you dive into something, you probably think about the person who goes deep that you think of in your network, and Brian goes deeper. So,
well, thank you.
No, I'm just saying, like this idea that the story we're telling about you're getting involved in Web3, I think it's probably pretty hard to reproduce in the amount of time that you reproduced it.
Yeah,
I just want people to know that
I'm
you're a certain type of person.
Right. I'm very lucky because I went deep. I already had a technical background and I was very curious about how this was working. So I dived in, and then it was just a nice way. Like I would produce content, go down and deep there. And I did that. And Quora, fortunately, was very good to me that year. I had like something like 5 million impressions over the course of the year. And I was like, I was the top content creator. I had my own blog at that point. I was posting articles on Hacker Noon and these other resources. And so it ended up being very good. So the next year, actually, I still didn't get into smart contract development by that point. I had read a lot about it. I knew what it was doing, but it's like, again, I don't like, I've never done like projects for the sake of doing projects. I'm still not very much about like, tutorial projects and things like that. I do them to understand, but it's hard to use that to showcase. And for me, it's like, I don't have an idea of what I want to do here yet. So like I was doing analytics. So like, actually the thing I did is I produced a paper where I tried to do cross-chain analysis, where basically I went to one day for Bitcoin, one day for Ethereum, and one day for, I think it was Ripple, I think was the network I was using, or, the chain. And I wanted to collect all that data into one area and really line up the dates and basically show how is money translating? Could we actually do this? And so I pulled some scripts. I was pulling data from Ethereum and XRP and all these networks. I put it into a database and I produced this paper. And I went out, and again, I started taking that out to different organizations. I had a conversation with Mazzari about this. And what I did, I ended up talking with one of the Ethereum co-founders at one point and telling him about like the shit I was seeing in the network. And they were like, he was like, yeah, I'm not aware that the stuff was happening. Like I found that I was actually doing stuff there.
Oh, wow.
And make that happen. So it was a lot of fun. So I thought I was going to go into analytics. I actually made an effort to start that company, and I found a mentor in the area and did that for 6 months and just hated being a solo founder. I disliked the process. I did that. I learned a lot, but I had about 6 months with my mentor. Finally, we got to into that. I broke off my relationship there and was like, okay, we tried this. I'm done. I'm not going to start a company. Let's go and do something, let's be close to family. I was in Indianapolis. I wanted to move to Raleigh. Yeah. So I got up, moved my family to Raleigh, went to IBM, and not really, I guess, exited the industry would be the right way, but basically didn't spend as much time there. So I stopped communicating with different businesses that I was working with there. I started focusing on it. I was just like, okay, I'm just going to be a DevOps engineer, which even that didn't work out. I wasn't a DevOps engineer. I was a manager within 3 years. So the plan, in a good way, kind of went off course. It wasn't until I came back that all of a sudden where it's like, it just kept knocking on my door. And again, I started mentoring at your boot camp, right? And I really loved that work. But all of a sudden I realized, I was like, the technology is feeding into the mentorship, but the mentorship is feeding me to get back into the technology. And that eventually led me back to the Web3 door. And so, anywho, so that kind of primed me. I had a lot of background. I had a lot of experience talking about this. I knew the philosophy very well. The technology side of it, its solidity, like I knew all the types and stuff like that. But like as far as contract development, like the details were never there. And so that basically got me to the beginning, late last year, beginning of this year, Web3 and diving into the smart contract development. So let me stop for a second, Aaron. Do you have any questions, clarifications, or do you want me to keep going?
No, that's great. I mean, I think that's super helpful too, because it's like I kind of want to paint this picture for folks that, I mean, you can go really fast. Like you can get involved in a cool project and like you can't, but to also I guess throttle expectations, because at this point you've been primed, before you actually got into writing something in Solidity. You knew what was going on.
And more than just that too, this was the right space for me, because I had tried entering the IoT space. That didn't work very well. I tried entering the data science space. That did not work very well. It wasn't like it was bad. I learned, but like there was a lot of career matching along the way. Web3 just happens to career match really, really well for whatever reason and factors. Yeah. I'll be, in a few years, I'll be better at explaining what was the factor that made this work for me as opposed to, don't get me wrong, IoT, serverless, things they were okay. Web3 just went on fire, because here's the thing. I spent like a year studying blockchain and I thought I was a noob, right? And here's a quick story. So I thought I was an absolute noob. So in data science, I spent like 6 months studying. I thought, I'm awesome. I did that. Went to a local rinky-dink Indianapolis meetup where we talked about data science. I'm with a group of people. They're all pretty competent. All of a sudden, I talked to one guy what he's working on. And he just like, basically, he's like a PhD who's spending his free time working on this new project where he's lining up like 4 GPUs to do some project. And I'm like, I can't compete. Like, I will have to spend years studying this stuff to be able to compete at this level. And I experienced that in like IoT was a little, the problem with IoT was more that there were more enterprise opportunities than there were like startup opportunities. I really like the small business. So that's a great technology too. It just, the opportunity is more present for, enterprise organizations and more sustained it's more of a sustaining technology, but we'll get to that another day. So I was traveling to New York for my job as a cloud engineer. I'd studied it for a year and I was like ready to get my ass kicked basically. Cause I'm like, I'm hungry to learn this technology. I want to go to. So I went to a 300 person meetup in New York with Joe Lubin, the co-founder of Ethereum. So I'm like, the guys who can wipe the floor with me are going to be here. Let's go and do that. I go into a room of 300 people. I start talking to them. I realize, holy fuck, I know more than 95% of the people in this room. The only people who I can find that know more than me work for Joe Lubin. Like, those are legitimately the only people. That was the transition that I think, fuck, maybe I should really get into this. So that was some pattern matching for me too, right? And so for you as, a developer, I'm introducing Web3. Maybe it doesn't pattern match as well. But that's the thing. You should give it a try, because I had to try in data science before I knew I failed. I had to try in IoT before you do this. So for me, it's like I tried many, many, many different things. This one just happened to light like fire. And that's why I went through well. So that's part of my story as well and why I work. So anyway, let's get to the story. So anywho, I had all this background. I knew how to develop smart contracts, but I never really dived into it really and do that. And so like I was basically waiting for an excuse. So anywho, you and I had been following Sahil Lavignia, I think is how you pronounce his last name. Sorry, Sahil, if I mispronounced that. He's been following for a while. I read The Minimalist Entrepreneur, and I love his philosophy on that. The community building. I think honestly, it's going to be his model for building companies is probably going to be the model for building Web3 startups. I think he has better, but that's probably another podcast. So to go in. Yeah. So anyway, he said, "Hey, I'm doing this dumb project. Let's go and actually to build this. It's called Web3." And just to show you how seriously he took it, anyone who joins this project is a fweeb. Okay, that's like like aligning yourself to anime culture, and that side of anime culture isn't exactly and literally like it was a Comic Sans poster. And honestly, I dug it. First off, I like Sahil and what he was working on. 2, it was only for the month of February. This is key, all right? Because here's the problem with a lot of...
By the way, some background. Sahil isn't just this guy who wrote this book on entrepreneurship. He created Gumroad.
Yeah, he's the founder of... he's the...
If you don't know what Gumroad is, like you live under a rock.
Right, he's the founder of Gumroad, and like as I was talking to him, as I learned to him, he's talking about like, oh yeah, I was talking to Naval the other day, and he was mentioning this, and I'm like, wait, you mean Naval Ravikant? Like... Naval Ravikant, the guy whose book that's up on my show wall, that guy? Yeah. Like, oh, okay. So he's like, he's there to do it. But again, he founded Gumroad, but at the end of the day, he's just some dude who just starts companies, he's a nice guy. So he did that. And I realized that like doing this project, it's like, oh, he just wants to create this game and wants to get involved. And it seems like fun. So I was just getting involved. And so
real quick, background on that. So Sahil doesn't work in Web3. I mean, Gumroad's totally Web2 kind of thing.
You're right.
He has interest in learning about Web3 and says, hey, a great way to learn about Web3 is to create a community of other people who can learn it together. And together we'll build basically a game which forces you to learn Web3.
Right. It's just a fun game to get everyone around. He minted a token at his own personal cost, mind you. I mean, he spent probably $20K on this. Like if transacting on Ethereum is not cheap, but like he invested a lot of his own personal money and he just wanted to learn. And again, that follows a lot of his minimalist entrepreneur philosophy, which is just start a community, learn together and grow, and just bring that here. I mean, he basically just doesn't care. Like, other people brought in, people like, were, taking credit for it. And he's like, I don't give a shit. Just, you do what, build and do that. We want builders. That's what he cares about. So he created this fun game and he was doing an airdrop. I signed up for the airdrop. And then I joined the community, and I was just kind of there, and doing that, and and hanging out. But then,
by join the community, you mean like he created
Discord.
a Discord?
It was just the
I'm
Discord.
just kind of translating.
Please,
you jumped on Discord, and you were just there.
I was just on Discord. I was just there, and I was just looking around. And so, like, I was kind of looking around, and like I noticed a problem. And this is, by the way, the actual model on what you should be doing when you get into these things. I learned I found a problem, and it's like, geez, Ethereum is really expensive. We airdrop this token on here, but the truth is, if we want to get high volume, if we want to get people using this, we can't be expecting them to pay $10 a transaction. That's a lot.
Yeah.
So I looked into it, and he had in his roadmap that he wanted to move into an L2. We thought that was the future, but I thought we kind of need that. We kind of need an L2 solution now. Please
explain what L2 is real quick.
An L2 solution is a scaling solution effectively to make Ethereum cheaper to transact on. There is a whole lecture about L2. Basically, all you need to know is that it is a solution built on top of Ethereum, can be a roll-up, can be a side chain. We'll get into that later, another podcast. But it's a solution that means that you're dealing with Ethereum underneath at some level. You can transact on Ethereum, but it allows you to be cheaper. There was a lot of sorry, yes.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say, yeah. So like, whenever you have a transaction on the blockchain, there's a cost associated to it, and then usually the user who creates the transaction pays that cost in what's called a gas fee.
That's correct.
So that's why it's expensive. But there's another way to do transactions which are cheaper, which is the L2 you're talking about.
Right, and do that. And just to give you an idea, transacting on Ethereum, for a normal transaction is $6. Transacting on Polygon, which was what we chose, which is a side chain, 1 penny. Big difference, right?
Yeah.
And doing that. So anywho, we need to figure that out. So anywho, no one was really running after, and this is really critical here. No one was running after the problem. I kind of went and validated, would this be useful? I didn't ask permission. I didn't say, can I build this? I said, would it be useful, and do that? And I got very little response, but enough. I got like 1 or 2 responses to be like, yeah, that'd be useful. And guys, I just ran after it. That felt weird. Okay. Because I've been working in the machine at IBM for a while. It felt weird to do, but at the same time, like I'm going to do, because I don't know if I'm going to step on anyone's toes or did that, but it's like, this is decentralized. I'm just going to start building. So I literally took our chain. I went to Polygon, read the documentation, found a way to bridge the tokens, put in a request to bridge the token. Polygon set it up basically so we could go and do that. I paid for the bridge. And that's the important too. I paid out of my own pocket to go and do the transaction, which cost me a lot of Ethereum basically to do that, way more than you would expect for a test there. But I bridged over some of the Web2 tokens, the FWEB tokens, whatever they were called, had it running on Polygon. And then I started sending them out to random people to go and do. So once that was done, I'm like, okay, this actually works. This whole system works. So I tested out the whole system beginning. So then I went back to the community. I created a Notion document that said, and Notion is just a document tool online. I could have done this in Word and sent it out to people. But I just wrote, here's my proposal. And I literally said it's a proposal to the community. I did this. I proved it. Here are the transactions to prove that it works. Here's why we might go over to this and do this. And then I did a short video explaining what it was. And I put that out there and did that for the community. I sent it to Sahil and he said, this sounds great. He bridged over 1 million tokens to Polygon within a week. And he redid the airdrop basically to do that. And then it was running on Polygon. That was the big deal. Right. And so that was the first problem. And so that was the first problem we solved. So I thought, okay, great. Then there was an education problem where I was like, well, people don't know how to deal with this. So then I started creating videos. Again, didn't ask anyone if I should go create videos. I just started creating them, sending them out to people and, started helping out, and then it was funny very quickly, even though I had no official position inside of Sahil's organization, not until later, people started just coming to me for problems, and issues and things like that. They assumed I was administrator. Like people even assumed who aren't familiar with the project, they assume I co-founded it with him. Like I knew him beforehand and I was doing that when that wasn't the case. I just really helped building. So that was the first technical problem. The second one really came to distribution. And was really the Matic, where it's like, okay, we the goal of the project, and again, I had this goal in mind of what I knew they were trying to accomplish, was to have as many people transact on this thing as we can. But it's like they don't have money, and that's the thing. Dealing in Ethereum has a lot of exchanges that deal directly with Ethereum, so you can send tokens for yourself to Ethereum. Polygon has less, and it's actually, and because it's a side chain, there's like more complicated token dynamics. Like you have wrapped Ethereum, which isn't the token there. You have Matic, which is the thing you need to transact with. There's other tokens that are doing stuff there. I think there's even like wrapped Matic on the Polygon chain. So it's like, we don't want people trying to figure out how to go to exchange because it's going to be complicated. It's not supported. So we thought we want to just give people tokens for free. You know, we just want to do it. It's cheap, right? It's like 50 cents in tokens is more than enough for you to be able to go and do what you need. So we thought, well, that's a faucet. So I went online and I looked and saw that whenever you run and do a faucet for like, a test net or, some other smaller main chain, it's literally a smart contract that basically you go and distribute, you asked it for a distribution, you get paid there. And that's a smart contract development. So I went, okay, well, let's go and do that. So I literally...
So a faucet real quick is just a way to get tokens.
Just to get tokens, right, to send it. It sends it for free. You pay no cost to it. But again, there's an architecture question there on, okay, well, who is the runner for this with the guests? More than what we want to get into here. So I said, okay, well, what do I need to learn? It's like, well, I need to learn a little bit of hard hat. So I went and learned hard hat. And that was a really good tool to use. I used their tutorials. I used their things. And I started building there. And it was really fun. I really enjoyed that. Then I had to learn, Solidity, and I got into it. And so I had been studying these concepts before, like I knew the details there, but then I would have a question on, okay, well, I want to do this. So what's the best way to do this? I would go and try, figure out what that is. And I would go and put that in. Then I was like, okay, well, what's the best way to do this thing or that thing or whatever? And I would just slowly build there. Because I was a developer, I knew test-driven development. That's something that I wanted to be able to do to make this work. And so I would literally build my test cases, put it into the function, and then watch it run. And that's when I kind of realized a bunch of the Python stuff I learned started clicking here, where it worked a lot like Python and the way they operated. And so I was just making it cleaner and cleaner. So once I had, it took me a couple of days to write this contract. It wasn't very long. I wrote my test cases out, and then I went through and said, hey, here's the faucet, here's a test net. Again, no one really knows this is happening. Or I guess at this point, people kind of trust me. So I'm just announcing I'm doing it and people are following me on this network. And so I put it into testnet and they say, okay, it works. And then I actually find somebody else in this community who is a front end developer. He didn't know the back end as well. And so I would work with him to build the React, but then I was his SME for how the contract worked and how gas worked and all these things. And so I was explaining him these concepts. And that's what working with him made me realize how
subject matter expert.
Yeah. Yes. Sorry. Thank you. Working with him made me realize how much decentralization was a big transition from what we had used before. Because he was struggling with basic concepts in Solidity. He's a smart developer. I saw what he built. He's not a chump. Right. But when he actually started asking questions about the network, it's realizing, wow, we're a lot further away from, getting this out there. I got to see this where stuff that I understood, like the smart contract doesn't hold gas in it. The transaction pays for that, or how interactions were a little bit foreign to him. And so I had to explain that and put those into details and really write it out there and do that. So I started creating videos. I started doing this faucet. So anywho, we launched this faucet on mainnet. We launched this thing, and all of a sudden it starts getting used a lot. And within a few weeks, it was used over 1,600 times basically, to do that. So people were using the faucet. And then we wanted to build a faucet, but did the same thing for for the Web2 for the Web3 token. So I built a faucet for that using the same methodology. Then Sahil actually had a voting mechanism, and I saw he did something in the voting mechanism, the original, that didn't quite work the way I was, that it should. He was using arrays instead of mappings, and there's specific reasons why you don't want to do that for gas purposes. And they stay in here. So I took his contract, rewrote it with mappings involved, and I actually did that. And so to the point where he incorporated my code changes, and I again did the same thing. Make a video, do the contract, make a video explaining why you make those changes, and send it out there. So that's really one of the other lesson here, is that not only did I not ask permission to build, but because anyone can go and build, you have to justify why you built it. That's the big thing. You don't, because you're not asking permission, you have to go and justify why you're doing what you're doing. So for me, it was easy enough to build out this code and then explain it. But by putting together a Notion document, by explaining these videos and doing this, it made it really easy for people to accept that this was the best way to do it. And Sahil actually went and watched my video on figuring out how mappings work. And then he went and changed the whole voting mechanism over to use mappings instead. Made it a lot faster, awesome. Made it quicker. So it ended up being really good. So
And then I started experimenting with other contracts where I did this, self-taxing token, which, that went over like a lead balloon, but I still think that there's some use to it to do that. So I moved that. And then let me pause here actually, because this is where we're getting into some of the juicy stuff.
Yeah, I think I was just gonna say, quick question: how many folks are in the Web3 community now?
Definitely over 1,000. I mean, there's
Definitely
more
over 1,000.
people. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's like, though you're a seasoned developer, and maybe that's who we're talking to right now are people who are going to be eventually seasoned developers.
Right.
I think the story is the perfect story that I keep trying to preach, which is that, it's hard to learn concepts by going through tutorials, watching YouTube videos, or reading documentation. But if you have something to build and something real to build, like, you can fly, right? I mean, like, you had like an actual purpose to learn this stuff. And it's, what's funny to me about your story, Brian, is like, for years and years, you were sort of a subject matter expert on these technologies, but you hadn't built anything.
Yeah.
Because you hadn't had something to build yet. And that's what I always try to tell, like, bootcamp grads, for example, is, hey, in your final project, like, let's try and build something real. And they always get mad because they're like, well, I'm not a founder of a company. I'm not trying to raise money, etc. And what I'm trying to get at is, well, building something real enables real learning. Like, you're not going to be as involved in a tutorial. And if you start doing the work of a software engineer right now, then that transition into actually being a software engineer, i.e. like someone paying you or getting involved in a substantial project, like, that's a smaller jump than if you're just doing tutorials and then suddenly you try to leap into the real world where you're building real stuff. If you can find an actual problem, whether it be open source or even the Web3, like, it's sort of magical, right? How quickly that evolved. And suddenly you're the leader of this 1,000+ person organization. And you're being seen by, some of the best startups, at least some of the best, I'd say, like, non-VC backed startups like Gumroad folks, is like, oh, this guy is an expert in this.
I mean, I've got it. Like, there's a gentleman, I think his name was DL Prager. That's his handle, where he reached out to me and was like, oh, okay. Do you know Ryan Carson? It's like, no. It's like, oh yeah, he sold Treehouse. He's now starting Web3. Let me go and introduce you to him. I got a conversation with Sahil to talk about the future of Web3, where now I want DevMint to be like a staker of their tokens to do that. So we had the conversation with them. I've had now 3 people reach out to me asking if I want to join their project that are in Shadow to do that, and there's just lots of offers for wanting to see projects and help. But honestly, Aaron, as I'm thinking about Parsity and I'm thinking about programs, the hardest thing for people, because again, I've been doing mentorship for years now. That's my main business. My main business is not Web3. It's not technology.
Love that.
It's finding opportunity for ambitious builders and giving the tools, techniques, and the encouragement to move into a new industry. That's what really drives me. That Web3 died tomorrow, that would live on for me, in what I would do. But one of the core problems you have is building that real thing, experiential knowledge.
Yeah.
And I think there might be a place for even Parsity to start moving into the Web3 space because of this exact model we talked about. Because here's the thing, you're right. It is hard to build without permission, right? You need, somebody needs to go through. And again, that takes sales, that takes charisma. They need to like you, what you do there. You're dealing with their products. But these are all decentralized. Even on Gnosis, who I've had a call with, them about potentially partnering up with them. I basically was asking them permission to say, hey, how can we use your curriculum, or can we use this to build curriculum? And Arden kind of looked at me and went, it's open source, dude. We don't control that. And even I make that mistake where I'm still asking permission. Yeah. But if you go to projects, what you can do is you can find something. I just wrote this on LinkedIn, and it's this is the simplest idea, but it's so easy. Find an NFT project you like, find its smart contract, learn its ABI and how it interacts with it, build a front end for it. That's it. Yeah. That's literally it. You are literally, if you see something where it's hey, I'm going to build a mobile front end for this thing to go through, or I'm going to build something where it's more straightforward, or it's more flashy, or maybe it's got a Dune analytics dashboard built in to do that. It's literally, You don't have to ask permission. You don't have to do anything. But guess what? It has to be real. Because guess what? You need to be able to execute a contract. You need to be able to get this working on a test net, basically, to do that. You're going to do all the real steps. And then once it's done, it's going to look unique. You can give it to the community and said, hey, I built this for you guys because I had something I wanted to add to it. Or I just gave it a different look. Here's, I'm using some of my UX design that I learned from this course there to do that. Or I have some easier data. I did some other thing to optimize it to go through. You can do that. Uniswap needs better interfaces. All these decentralized tools need extra boards and things like that. I mean, there's literally $1,000 bounties out there just to build full stack websites for these guys to do that. I think there's a place that we could transform Web 2 development by integrating with Web 3, just because the decentralization aspect means that projects are easier to build and seem real without having to ask for permission. That's why I think it could be so big.
In other words, Web3, even if you're not going to build Web3 technology, it enables a lot more Web2 projects that are far more approachable probably than a lot of current Web2 projects.
Again, you learn a little bit of ethers.js. It's not a super hard technology. The philosophy is, which is, hey, come to DevMint. That's what we teach, right? And what we're doing, and we'll teach you the philosophy that goes through. But once you understand how it actually works, how gas fees works, etc., you can go and build on those things. You can just have it interact the right way, and all of a sudden you can start learning. And guess what? It's real. It's real, because if it doesn't work, it's going to be painfully freaking obvious. And there's a whole specification that sits behind behind a wall that's not super easy to use quite yet. So guess what? That's real engineering.
I love that, man. And that probably answers the question I was going to ask, which is, what is this path for, beginner developers who are probably learning a more approachable skill set, which is, your full stack software engineer. That's what all of us boot camps teach.
Right.
But kind of as in close, Brian, what advice or actionable next steps would you have for someone who's either in like the pre-boot camp phase, the boot camp phase, or like post boot camp junior developer phase, for like what are the first steps to not just learning about conceptually what Web3 is and what crypto is, but what are some good first steps for actually learning some of the technologies?
I mean, I'm going to go with over hundreds of mentorship meetings and calls and things like that. The gap I find is not in the learning, right? There's lots of good learning that's out there. It's getting involved enough with a project or group that you can start to find those opportunities. So honestly, if you wanted to get started, I would honestly, take the traditional development stuff seriously. That's the thing. Like, they are, Web3 companies are dying for any tech talent, but they need to understand decentralization. They need to understand that stuff. So I would say, if you're not in Web 2 right now, get involved, start learning, do your boot camp, do your learning, take that seriously, and start creating projects. Then I would say, start to learn, start to play around with Web 3, start to understand decentralization, get a wallet, start to transact, get that Coinbase account up, send money, lose money, get scammed, do all the things that you get out there to do. Buy a dumb NFT that you can't explain to your parents. Why did you buy this dumb fucking thing? To do that, experiment and get involved, because the more you get involved, once you transact, you start to see the mechanism and how it changes. And you have the first time you have a transaction that just gets lost, you're like, well, where the fuck did it go? I don't know, to do that. That'll get you involved. So I think, in addition to just take it seriously, just set up a wallet, find a chain, get interested in it, get curious about the technology, and go and start to get a little bit deeper. That curiosity will drive a lot of the extra learning, and do that. For more than that, well, that's what we got DevMint for, basically, to go and teach the details, because we're already out of time. So that's what I would say. Just get involved, make a transaction, have your own wallet, play around with it, have money you can lose. That's the big thing too. Don't have money. Don't try to make money. Take $100 and say, this is to blow on learning this technology. $100 is more than enough.
That's awesome, to get started. Well, I appreciate it, Brian. This has been super helpful. Not even for, I think, hopefully the folks that are listening, but I think for me too, to kind of put this into a narrative, this process that you've been going through. So thanks for being on, our first repeat guest. Have a good rest of your day, man.
Sounds good. Thanks, man.
All right, that does it for today's episode of the Develop Yourself podcast. To find more information out about Brian, we're going to have his LinkedIn and Twitter down in the show notes. To find out more information about his and my next project, DevMint, we have a very sparse website up at devmint.xyz. To learn more about my online code school that teaches beginners how to become software engineers, go to parsity.io, parsity.io, to join our free 30-day cohort-based JavaScript course that every beginner should go through, because we work on your skills, your habit, your mindset, and your network during these 30 days. Go to dev30.xyz. It's dev30.xyz. We have another program starting on April 25th. It is free. This is the last time it's going to be free. Over 270 people signed up for the last one. So make sure you get in there and learn your first programming language. And then the last plug here is for Peter. Peter has an amazing YouTube channel. If you don't know Peter, he is the other co-host, and he probably recorded the last episode of this podcast and the next one. So check out his episodes as well. We will see you next week.